But like, so Mark, this is a good segue for us. So let's talk about if you're a tenant, how do you approach your landlord? And if you're a landlord, how are you viewing what is going to be a wave of defaults on, and I think it's different for residential than commercial. So if you could talk about what you're seeing on both sides of those things.
So the residential side, most of the landlords, interestingly, are still getting, most of the ones I'm dealing with are still getting a good majority of their rents. They're getting enough to service their debt. They have reserves. They've done pretty well, and they kind of see this as a temporary issue, and they're not really all that panicked. It depends on the size of the property. It depends on how sophisticated they are, but by and large, you know, I've got one that where there's 12 tenants. I just worked on it yesterday. There's 12 tenants, and 9 of the 12 are paying their rent. So there's enough rent coming in. It's the typical, you know, smart investment you make as an investor in residential, where no one tenant's going to crush you. A couple tenants not paying isn't going to crush you. But yeah, if all 12 weren't paying, it would be a bad day. But you're just not seeing that. There's still enough people with reserves or income or what have you to pay their rent. And then most tenants realize they've sought, you know, the advice of people like me, where they realize that even if I don't pay my rent, it's not waived. I've still got to pay it eventually. So I don't really want to have that pain down the path of time here. It's in my best interest to pay it now if I have the money. And so they're doing that. And so I'm seeing that on the residential side. On the commercial side, it's feast or famine. There's people that have plenty of money to pay their rent, or it's just a complete bloodbath, and they just have no way of paying. And so those folks are coming to me, and I'm basically helping them put together a package. The challenge is how sophisticated is the landlord, and a lot of these landlords have been through this drill for so long, where somebody's not paying their rent, that they're treating it like a typical default, where it was because they couldn't run their business, or there was market forces that were in their domain that they had control of. So the typical knee-jerk response is, we want 3 years tax returns, they have to be audited, we want, you know, full financial, we want all this stuff. And it's like, I can show you what, you know, like the one that comes to mind. I had a chiropractor. He was treating 25 patients a day on up to March 15th. And on March 19th, when the stay-at-home order was lifted, he was seeing 3 a day. So, you know, what kind of empirical data do you really need to show your landlord to show that this thing had an impact on your income? And so a lot of it is understanding the nature of the beast. And then the other problem is that even the 6-month order is really not a solution. I mean, if you think about it, the way this works is the gates are lifted, or however you want to talk about it, the order is lifted. You still have to pay your regular rent that first day, and you don't have any business. You're not back up to speed yet. And then within 6 months, you got to pay back all the rent you didn't pay. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster. So what I'm doing with clients is I'm basically helping them package a business plan to take to the landlord for stretching out the time frame to make the cure. So let's start the repayment not the day after the order is lifted, but 6 months after the day the order is lifted. And then as opposed to a 6-month stream, let's do a year stream. I'm just using an example by, you know, just kind of example what I'm doing. And so we're pushing it down the line, and we're spreading it out over a meaningful period of time. And then by and large, I'm looking at the lease, and I'm sitting there saying, well, why don't we negotiate an extension of the lease for a couple of years? And then the tenant gets into a mindset where they get more comfortable about really putting together that package that the landlord wants anyhow. And it's a completely different tenor to the negotiations. It's not I want a bailout, but more, let's come up with a business plan together and go work together to go create this
that's
solution.
particularly interesting to me. So like, and we talked about this last week, and I think there's different things that as a commercial tenant, you can offer a landlord that cost you nothing or almost nothing,
right,
and are very valuable to a landlord. You mentioned that extension of the lease as being a carrot that you can throw on top of the pile. John, I see you nodding there, and I know that you deal with this stuff a lot as well. Do you have any thoughts or anything that you want to add to what Mark's given us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very aligned with what Mark is saying for the most part. I will say that I'm seeing a pretty interesting disparity between the type of tenant and the type of rent relief they're getting. Since this whole thing started, the majority of my day has been working out deals for tenants with their landlords. I would strongly prefer them to call Mark because he can build for it. I can't.
Which is why they're not calling me and they're calling you.
We're busy, but I don't know that we're busy making money over here. But we are getting deals done for tenants that need that relief. With
Just so my audience is clear, you do this for free.
You're recording this. I'm done answering questions.
We'll cut that part out.
So here's what we are seeing. Mark's right. The institutional side of things, it has been responding by the book. Pay your rent on time. There are letters that go out every so often to their tenants requiring them to abide by the terms of the lease. And then you've got the flip side of that, which is the mom and pops or the local landlords, and they're responding much more generously than the institutions are. And that's surprising because a lot of these people count on that income, but they come from a very understanding place. And so coming to the table and explaining to them what's happened in the business is really important. So the story, the business plan that Mark talked about is really important. On the institutional side, you have to hold them to the city ordinance effectively in order to get your rent relief. That's what I'm finding. And so that's a very by the book. You ask for the relief, they deny it within 7 days. As Chris mentioned, you provide them with the details that are required under the ordinance, and then you're allotted that certain period of time. But as Mark pointed out, that's going to be a recipe for disaster when it all comes due. So in many cases, so I'll give you a couple of examples. Breweries, for instance, we're getting 90 days of not deferment, just straight up rent abatement, period, end of story.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Aren't these people like, and this is the question that I get from everyone is aren't the landlords concerned that they're still going to have to go find another restaurateur to take over this space, and that these people have every ounce, the guarantees aren't worth the paper that they're written on, and these people are like, it's just, you can't move laterally from this position. Like, aren't they looking past, at least a 2-month horizon? I mean, like, what
again, though, it's very industry dependent. So on one hand, you've got the restaurant industry and the breweries and the people that, I mean, I was talking to a brewery the other day and he said, look, even if I had more beer to sell, which I don't because we're not brewing it right now, I wouldn't have anyone to sell to. I would have no way of getting my ingredients here. We're completely shut down. And so I took that story to the landlord and said, what do you want to do? Because all the breweries are giving me this story. So do you want to find another one that's going to give you the same story, or do you want to work with the one you have? And the answer was, we want to work with the one we have. And they kicked out 3 months of absolute unequivocal rent abatement, not asking for the money back. We want you to be successful, because they were smart. And they're a quasi institution. So they're somewhere in between mom and pop and big New York finance, right? On the flip side, I've got a lot of law firms that can't make money right now because the courts are closed, but as soon as they open, they'll come back to making money. And the biggest issue for most law firms is whether or not they can actually collect money in a couple months when it's owed, right? I mean, I
was going to jokingly say that, but apparently it's not funny.
No, we represent a lot of law firms, and that's the case. They say, are our accounts receivable going to actually get paid? So, but landlords are less sympathetic to the law firm than they are to the brewery. It's just the nature of it. Right. What I think, and this is conjecture, I won't engage in a lot of this, but what I think will be really interesting is when stay-at-home order is lifted and people go back to offices, just how usable those offices are, whether or not the density of a call center is going to be usable anymore, whether or not these tenants can actually afford to pay those rents, right? Because, I mean, Cushman & Wakefield's a great example. They're rolling out a 6-foot office plan for tenants, and it's somewhat ridiculous, but it's where we are. It's a one-way route from an office with requirements to take paper, the same kind of paper that you'd wrap a Subway hoagie in, and put it on your desk, and it's a disposable desk service. I mean, there's crazy things that are coming to light as part of a process to deal with this. And we're all going to have to look at that. All right, so I'm done with the conjecture, but back to working it out with landlords and looking at Leo Klein's questions around whether or not tenants can constructively approach their landlords, absolutely yes. Be prepared with all the details. They're all asking for financial information. They all want to know how disrupted your business is. Give it to them. Whether or not you have to, give it to them. It's not going to be difficult to show that you've been interrupted in some way in your business. And so that hire an attorney if you need to hire an attorney. Mark's very good at what he does. Mark was a broker for 30 years as well as a lawyer, so he really knows how to approach these landlords. And it's I would say that right now, working out deals, we've got a 85% success rate with landlords. And that repayment schedule is anywhere from the end of this year to the end of 2021 and everywhere in between.
Yeah, same. The other thing I would say, in addition to pointing some of the more institutional guys to the statute, is I also point them to the fact that the statute, it's specific. Go read the governor's order. It specifically addresses the orders from the Fed to give relief to the landlords, and they need that same documentation that they're asking the tenant to give them. So by packaging it properly for the landlord for the rent relief, you're actually setting the stage for the landlord to repackage that exact same data for their lender. And so it's, help me help you. And so once you make them understand that, look, the business plan isn't just for me, it's for both of us, you get a different response.
Right. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And by the way, just to add this on, a lot of landlords are requiring tenants to apply or get PPP financing in order to cooperate with them. And I'm not just talking about San Diego here. That's more of a big picture scenario. But a lot of them, their protocol is, let's see if they can get the loan. That loan can be used to repay us. It's a little bit of good money after bad versus using the PPP as a protocol to give some kind of rent deferment. And I'm seeing a lot of landlords point to that at first, and then you kind of have to walk them back from it.
That's part of the business plan that I'm putting together. Is I'm actually telling my clients, one of the things is if they were a bad tenant before, I won't work with them. So if they've been in default and they were having problems before, or they were just a bad actor, I just won't work with them. This is a catalyst. But the other thing I'm telling them is that, you absolutely have to go apply for that relief, and part of that business plan, build that up. The last thing I would say that we're ignoring here a little bit, not purposely, is they have to look at their lease. So all the provisions for how you give notice and how you deliver this information, and a lot of times there's a preemptive strike you have to hit with a notice of default as a landlord that isn't the 3-day notice. It's an intermediate step. And if you don't procedurally go through that step, you're going to be in a bad place when you ultimately do want to or need to evict. So don't ignore the provisions of the lease. So the process is, first you figure out what municipality you're in. Is there some overriding order? You then look at the government's order. You look at the judicial order. You layer them all together and you figure out what are the rules of engagement if we agree to nothing. So you understand what that is. And then the final layer of that is, what does the lease say? And you've got to bring that into the analysis. And if you're not looking at your lease, you're going down a bad path.